Back in 2016, I remember making my mom drive all over the place from store to store on Black Friday looking for the hot ticket item of that year, the NES Classic. For just $60, you got a collection of 30 of the most iconic games of all time, all for the price of one copy of FIFA 17. However, it was not meant to be, and despite going to several stores, we kept finding that all of them were sold out completely. The production run was so limited that it seemed no one could get one. Years later, in 2018, after managing to get the SNES Classic as well, I finally got the NES Classic during its second limited production run. This was a big deal to me at the time. I was just starting to get into programming in old video games, and I had never played any of these games before, not even Mario 1, so I was excited to dive into them. I played this thing for hours and definitely got my money's worth. Fast forward to today, and I have many ways to play these games, whether it be Switch Online or the actual cartridges on the NES I bought, but I still want to revisit this thing. I want to see what Nintendo considers to be the most important games that made this system so groundbreaking and iconic. Because of that, I decided to revisit every game on this thing in order of its US release, starting with Mario 1. Except this isn't going to be a review of Super Mario Bros. There's been about 1 million of those, and I don't think I have anything interesting to add to them. Instead, I kind of want to set the scene as we look at why these games and the NES as a whole are so important. The year is 1983. The world has almost ended due to a computer bug in a Soviet nuclear early warning system, and more importantly, the video game market has crashed. The Atari 2600, despite having some fun games on it, had way too much garbage made for it. Think of it like the app stores on smartphones today, except now imagine Minion Run costed $90 and looked something like this. You can see how something like that might not last. Stores didn't want to stock video games and customers didn't want to buy them. And this is around the time Nintendo was looking to launch the NES in the US. In order to get around the stigma of being a video game system, they created Rob the Robot of Mario Kart DS fame and marketed the system as a toy. This would get the system into stores, but in order to keep good word of mouth and keep the sales going, excellent games that distinguish themselves strongly from previous ones would be required. Which brings us to Super Mario Bros. The details of this game's development are quite interesting. A lot of them can be found in the Ask Iwata interviews that are posted on Nintendo's website. For the 25th anniversary of this game, around the time New Super Mario Bros. Wii was the latest game in the series, the president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, sat down to discuss the development of this game with the original designers and music composers. There's a lot of interesting tidbits in these interviews, like how development was actually kind of rushed. Also, originally, Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, wanted to add levels where Mario rode on a rocket and shot lasers, which would sort of happen in Super Mario Land on the Game Boy 4 years later. The developers of this game describe it as a culmination of everything they'd learned developing their previous games. It's important to note that even though this was a launch title here in the US, it actually launched in Japan about 2 years into the system's life over there. Because of this, the team behind Mario had already garnered a lot of experience developing other games. Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and the arcade Mario Bros. Would be the main inspirations. The level scrolling, which we take for granted but was very impressive at the time, was inspired by a Japan-only game called Devil World. The The swim mechanics were pulled straight from Balloon Fight. And even the warp system was inspired by how you could pick which level you wanted to play in Excite Bike. All of these elements from various games were pulled together to make this one. I think another reason why this game was so revolutionary is that it clearly illustrated a jump forward for how video games were designed. In the Atari era, a lot of video games required you to read the manual to figure out how things worked. However, here, the developers wanted the learning process to feel a little more natural. In the interview, Miyamoto discusses how his first enemy, the mushroom-shaped Goomba, is right at the beginning of the level. When you run into it and die, you'll learn to avoid these. Next, when you jump and hit this question mark box, a mushroom will spawn from it. If you're under the impression that it's dangerous because the last mushroom-shaped object was dangerous, you'll likely panic once it bounces off this pipe and comes towards you. You'll try to jump to avoid it, but you'll hit the block overhead and be bounced back into the mushroom, powering you up. This way you learn that this mushroom is good. It's the basics that this game really gets right. It nails things so well that to this day, almost 40 years later, in their latest game, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, you can still very clearly see the DNA of this game. The swimming levels let you have a nice change of pace from the standard running levels without slowing down the action, and the music changes up depending on the level atmosphere to keep things from getting stale. Even the backgrounds change, which today is no big deal to us, but Miyamoto explicitly stated this as being important to him back then, as at the time, most games usually had a black or plain colored background. This game also standardized the boss fight at the end of every zone. There's so many things that feel like no-brainers to us today, but it all started because of this game. That's not to say that this game doesn't have any bad elements. I don't particularly care for the maze aspect of many of the later castle levels. There's a mandatory route you have to take, and if you mess it up, the whole pattern restarts. I don't think this mechanic has come back, but I haven't finished a lot of the early Mario games to know for sure. I also can't get past the Hammer Bros consistently. Their timing is very strict, and I also have a hard time getting the timing right on these springs, but this could just be a skill issue. Speaking of skill issues, if you keep having some, this game actually doesn't make you start completely over when you lose all your lives if you know a simple trick. After you get a game over, keep holding down the A button and press start to continue on the world you died at. I hate when games from this era make you restart the entire game after losing all your lives, and even though I don't think this sort of thing should be a hidden secret, I'm still happy it's here. I didn't replay the whole game for this review as I played it enough to know how I feel about it, but I was surprised how tough of a time I was having with it. I was dying to the most basic things, and I realized the issue is that I'm so used to playing later games in the series, especially Mario Maker, that the physics here just feel a bit off. Mario has so much momentum, and I found it hard to adjust back to this style of control. So be mindful of that coming back to this from other games. I know this gameplay makes it look like I've never played a Mario game before, but I don't care. I've overcome Mrs. Hydrated Gaming's Mario Maker level designs, and I'm confident in my abilities.
Was this supposed to be a tree? Like, why did you put the spikes like that? Were you like building a little tree?
I don't know.
It wasn't enough for you to have Bowser, who has a random pattern. We also have that other guy who just spawns in randomly.
I only put it in there because you put it in every course that I had to play.
I don't put them like... I make it a fair challenge.
No, you...
Yes, I do. Aww. Feels pretty good. That plane is going to
There's
kill me. No way! No way! This whole part at the beginning just sucks. Yep, that's the secret. Okay. Actually, if I know how to do that part, that makes this actually a lot easier. this is it.
Okay.
Oh. There it is. Got it.
Okay.
How about that?
All in all, it's clear to see why this game was so monumental. It still holds up 40 years later, and is still the go-to game for introducing newcomers to video games as a whole. The physics can feel strange to go back to, but I'm sure if I sat down with it for a while I could adjust back to them. More importantly though, this game really set the tone for what was to come on the NES and for video games in general at the time. Replaying it just makes me more excited to tackle the other games in the NES library that I haven't tried before. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again when we look at Excite Bike next time.